Hi there. Slightly different format today. So I'm going to be doing a demonstration of a still life painting. So normally I do these as live streams, but this is being pre-recorded, so it's Tuesday at the moment. We're talking about perspective in still life drawing. So I'm going to do a little explanation of one of my the reference material I'm going to be using. And then I can do a little bit of adjustment and show you some stuff on Photoshop, and then I'll get on and do the demo as normal. Okay, so I hope you like this format. I just thought, as the painting is, it's relatively ambitious, I thought it might be nice to get it done today, so you can watch it tomorrow. Okay, thanks a lot. Okay, so this is my reference photo. I set this up earlier in my studio today, and as you can see, I picked something with a nice strong tonal contrast, and I also picked these books and this block. So I thought this would serve quite well to show where the perspective is in this still life. Obviously it's a bit easier to see when we're using symmetrical sort of man-made things like blocks and that sort of thing. So I've set it up on Photoshop here, so hopefully I can illustrate to you at least how I would be thinking about my perspective lines. So I've taken the image here and put it on a larger background. And here I am, and I'm just trying to, I'm using these lines here to try and find out where my horizon line is. So these corner lines basically converge, and where they converge, that's a good place for me to think about my eye level being. Okay, so this is a really handy tool because all the other diagonals will also be on that converged line. So there we are, just establishing the eye line all across. And then I go on to find the vanishing point for the other plane of this block. So this is 2-point perspective. As I said, with this block, the corner is somewhat facing us. So we have 2 different vanishing points, and as you can see, this blue vanishing point is way outside of our peripheral vision. And that's just sometimes the case with 2-point perspective. So it's unlikely that you'll ever that vanishing point is going to even be within your field of view. But for drawing our subject, the main thing is we're just aware of these lines, aware that they converge, and that can help us with our final drawing. So I hope this little diagram illustrates to you how we think about the perspective of these various different objects. Okay, so this is me a bit earlier today, and I'm going to have a go at painting the reference photo. So usual sort of setup, just got my paints out there, usual colour palette, and I'm going to start this painting using a monochrome underpainting. So by that I mean I'll establish the tonal values just using one colour, in this case burnt umber. So what I like to do is I tone the canvas, and then once I've got it nice and dark, I sort of wipe off any excess paint, and that usually gives me something the equivalent of a mid value, so somewhere between dark and light, and that provides a nice basis for me then to establish my drawing, lay in the darks, and then also I can sort of quite early on evaluate the sort of tonal structure of the painting to see whether the shadows are working. So here I'm just rubbing the board. It's easy to do this with a cloth than with a brush. It needs quite a sort of vigorous rubbing. And as I say, we're trying to get the surface to be almost dry to the touch. And you need it to be dry so that the paint goes on without picking up too much of that background colour. And as you can see, when the umber is used transparently like that, it creates this very nice, almost golden sort of colour. So there, I'm just a bit of trouble with the autofocus. So that's this is a really nice way to start the painting, just with staining the board with burnt umber. So this is actually my second attempt. The first one I wasn't very happy with, as is often the way. So I wiped it down, and this is my second go at sketching it in. And as I say, the apple doesn't prove too much of a problem. There I'm just blocking in the core of the shadow, the line that separates the lights and the darks, which I mentioned is an important thing to observe when you're drawing these still life. So here we're just sort of sketching things in. Sometimes the second time round you just loosened up a bit, and things just, sometimes the scale, you go a bit big to begin with, so I felt a bit more relaxed doing this the second time round. So I've included my picture from Photoshop here, and this shows you my my workings out regarding the perspective. So you can follow along here and see how good or bad a job I made of it. So I'm really, here I'm just doing it by eye. I'm trying to match those diagonals as accurately as possible. And so no matter how long you've been painting, this exercise is really good. Even if you're just drawing, trying to get these diagonals by eye to give that sense that they're converging on a horizon line. And to say, it's quite an unforgiving exercise. Even just small errors will sort of show up and will look a bit skewed. But it's one of those things, you know, it's doable. You just have to practice, practice, practice. So there I am, just very gently, just trying to block those lines in. And there I've extended beyond, just to, again, we're trying to make sure that these lines converge as they go away from us. And the trick is they should converge on the same level. Each book should be converging on that same eye level. So I say with perspective, it's a combination. You're trying to understand the theory and then observe it, and that's the trick really. It's both. So this is one of the great advantages of pre-recording it. So I've just speeded this bit up a little bit. It shouldn't hurt. You can sort of still see what I'm doing and follow along. And as you can see, I cropped slightly bigger than the picture. But yeah, with each of these diagonals, I'm really trying to pay attention to get this feeling that they are heading towards the same vanishing point. And as you can see here, I extend those lines, and that also helps me to check my initial drawing. So that's something I'd recommend having a go with. So now I'm just starting to block in my shadows. And as some of you know who've seen me paint before, this is something I'm quite keen on, which is we can leave our base colour for our objects, and we can just start to lay in these dark masses at the background. So this is what I mean by painting the simple things first. We're just establishing these darks, and that will set us up. So what I'm doing here is I'm just sort of, for my own notes really, just clearly marking with the hatching the areas that are going to be effectively like very dark, and so that means I can block them in a little bit quicker. And there we are. So I was just using a bit of medium in this one, just so instead of terps at this stage, I quite like to use a medium. That's in this case it's just still terps, but with a little bit of linseed oil in, and that helps the paint flow, especially on this this gesso with the marble dust in, the paint doesn't flow particularly easily. I think that's part of the idea, really. It doesn't slip and slide all over the place, but so a bit of medium just helps things move along. So here I am. Now there was a bit of reflected light in this book, but for the initial blocking, you're just really trying to separate the lights and the darks. Stick to a very simple tonal pattern. And of course the umber is a nice colour for this, as it means that the shadows will be quite warm from the beginning. So there we go. So I really like these sorts of still lives with the strong lights and darks. Give this almost like it's a stage, really, with these objects illuminated. And it's nice to be able to use my studio for that. That's one of the things. So I was just tilting the board here slightly. I was just getting a bit of glare off the light overhead. There we go. So again, just blocking that in, just trying to get the tonal feel. So there's the highlight was down in this right hand side, so I leave that a bit paler. And as you can see, we're just finishing off with the block in. Going a bit darker there. And as you'll see, as the painting goes on, I sort of, having got the initial darks established, I like to go in and sort of tweak that a bit later. But for the beginning of the painting, this is what I'd suggest. It also helps you avoid the tendency to spend too long on one particular area at the beginning, which can be a problem. You can get bogged down in detail. So there we are, getting those very strong sort of cast shadows in. So really it's the tonal pattern that does a lot of the work in a painting like this. So that's really something when you're setting up, you know, the fact this little bit of light comes from behind the apple and that little square of red, I think those are quite, they help to give you that feeling of depth and that the light's coming through from the side there. And here I'm using a dry brush, so although this isn't really colour, I'm just using the dry brush to really establish these tonal patterns. And the dry brush is a nice way to work at this stage, so it's just trying to get a general sense of these values. So once I've established my lights and darks here, in this case I don't wipe out with the cloth, but I go straight in with the colour once I've established this tonal pattern. And as I say, so much of the painting is based on this clear separation of light and dark. So in my classes I often suggest to my students, you know, look at stencils. Good stencil art basically tells you a lot just with a black and white image, just the two tones. You can say a lot about what you're looking at, so you almost need to think in those terms. I think this is one of the areas, when I was at university, I benefited from, I spent quite a lot of time doing printmaking. So unfortunately it's not something I carried on because I don't have access to a print room. But doing the printmaking for a few years, it really reinforced to me the idea of strong sort of tonal design. For example, when you're doing lino cuts or etchings, you somewhat have to rely on just strong black and white designs. So there we are, just starting to lay in the colour now. So going in quite strongly there, starting, as you see, I start putting the yellow in the areas that are almost like the most illuminated, and then as I carry on around the apple, what happens is it tends to pick up a little bit of that burnt umber underpainting, and so it sort of naturally starts to darken slightly the more you sort of paint into it. So this is, I've speeded this up ever so slightly. I think this is probably about, well, it's not quite twice as fast as I would paint, but it's a bit faster. Because they say people only have the attention span of about 20 minutes. So maybe shortening this sort of helps people. But I mean, I think in total the painting took me about an hour. So, and when I'm out painting from life, I normally paint for about 2 hours. But it is good to take little breaks every now and again. And that's one of the reasons why I did this as a pre-recorded one. And as it turned out, it was useful because my initial block-in I wasn't very happy with. So this gave me the opportunity to tweak that. And also at the end, I think I took it to a slightly higher degree of finish than some of the other ones that I've done as live demos. There we go, just putting the highlight on. I think that serves as the lightest light for the whole composition. And it just helps to sort of establish that form of the apple. So just starting to lay in that sort of very warm, almost orange note down there. And that colour's really arrived at through the process of squinting and just trying to generalise. So as it looks now, maybe I did go a little bit intense with that orange, but I say that can always be knocked back a bit later. And then I'm just trying to get that shadow shape that's being cast from the apple, try and get that quite accurate. So looking at that, oh, it's like a negative shape, the shape between the shadow and the block. So there we are, it's got that laid in, and then lightening it slightly on that area there, just where it meets the light side. That helps that area to feel illuminated, just lessening the contrast there slightly. And then into this red book. So again, the red cover on this book I think works well. This is very much it's as a video I watched a few years ago, and it mentioned this idea of the brown school of painting. And this, I guess this is the sort of colour scheme. Maybe the yellow might be it may be a little bit acidy yellow, so probably more yellow ochre might be brown school painting, but it's basically like umbers and burnt sienna and oranges, and your accent colour would be this cadmium red, which as we can see just sneaks in this book. And then you don't really incorporate any blues or greens. I do actually put some, if you do put a blue in, it's normally a very desaturated blue, like maybe even ivory black or something like that. Ivory black can be used as a blue, but I think I might add a cooler note initially in some of the background. So there we go, there's a little cast shadow on that book that gives the feeling of the lip of the book and the pages. Now, although I advise against it, as you can see, I am doing sort of quite subtle corrections as I go. But I'm trying to just keep moving, just keep the whole thing moving along at a fair pace. And there again, concentrating on that diagonal, keeping that perspective in mind. warming up the shadow there slightly. And then we've got a very nice gradient in that part of the book as it just heads towards that the end point on the pages where we get that very light shade. And that gradient is it's a nice thing in itself if you can capture that. Now, although that lip of the book was in shadow, I sort of felt I wanted to bring that out just to restate the fact that that book is coming across there. I was a bit concerned whether the block of wood is actually very close tonally and colour-wise to the book that it's on. But in the end, I think I managed to restate that line a bit. And that's just some of the mottled colour on top of that book. So again, all you can do with an area like that is just sort of squint your eyes, try to get a sense of it tonally, and just make a sort of generalised statement about it. Okay. So for any of my students that are watching, I'm still planning to have a Zoom meeting later today. So I think this should give us a little bit of extra time. So I think we'll start the meeting at 11 if any of you are about and keen on that. You can let me know how this comes across. Whether you prefer the live stream. The trouble with the live stream, I mean, the live streams are great, I think, for doing the classes, but it adds a certain degree of tension with the painting, which doesn't always help the painting. So I enjoyed doing this one today. So I think it gave me, I just felt a little bit more relaxed, and as you'll see, I think I took it to a nicer degree of finish than I might otherwise. Now this is where I start to lay in. Now what's happened here is that I've really misperceived this colour, and I quite like this cooler grey, so I was thinking, oh well, I'll put that in this area, and so I use the cool grey almost as a bit like a blue, a bit like a complementary to all these oranges, which isn't a bad idea, and I say it is a bit of a it's sort of changing it deliberately for the sake of the colour, but I think in the end I took it back to that more sort of mustardy brown colour. Unfortunately, what happens with the way the camera's set up is we do tend to get a little bit of glare on the top of that, on the painting. It's just where so what I've done there is I've taken some of the colour of that apple and just taken it into the background, and I really like this effect. It's just it helps create a feeling of glow, and it adds a bit of energy, a bit of interest, and it's not you don't see it in the photograph, but when you're actually observing the still life objects, you know, it's rare that your eye will give you such a focused edge, and so this echoes the experience of looking at these very brightly lit objects in the dark. You get this almost sort of glow coming off them. So here I'm just really trying to improve this gradient on the book. So just a very nice going from dark to light. It's one of the effects that's made it's easier to achieve, I think, a good gradient like that with oils. You can obviously go back and forth. And here again, unfortunately, there's a bit of reflection on the board there, but that area is quite dark. It's one of the challenges of filming myself painting is trying to minimize glare, so there's perhaps a bit too much light bouncing around in that I'm using as a studio at the moment. But hopefully you can still get the big effect. Darkening that down, so it's sort of lessening the contrast. It helps to push it back, push it into the distance a bit more. So as you can see, really the whole thing has been blocked in now, and what we're seeing now is just some tweaks and adjustments. So there I'm creating just a warmer little passage between the shadow and the mid-tones. And I think I also, here's the reflected light in the apple. So that's the reflected light. And then there, again, just making that a slightly smoother transition from the core of the shadow into the mid-tones on the apple. And just a little bit of tweaking there with the modelling of the form, I think. Yeah, a bit lighter. So this is one of the enjoyable parts of the painting, but I say there's no point in doing these more subtle tweaks unless you've got a nice strong tonal pattern. So that's why they say that it's actually the starting of the painting that's the important bit. This is really the icing on the cake, these little adjustments, but the painting is usually won or lost in the initial block-in. I'm adding a little bit more reflected light, possibly overstating it there slightly, looking at it, looking back at it. Now I think at some point when I was painting this, actually I was looking at the reference material on my iPad, and the iPad, the battery died. So although I did still have the image to hand on the computer screen, I was more asking myself the question, what does the painting need? So when you've been observing a subject for long enough and you've got the basis sort of blocked in, then at some point you have to start to look at the canvas more and just more think about the picture, you know, what needs to be played up, what needs to be pushed down. And here, these are again, that's nice. These are little tonal bits. They're quite small, but they actually say a lot about the form and how the form's sitting. So yeah, I'm just increasing that red there. So the red is definitely the accent colour. And these were some old books that one of my students donated to me in one of my classes. And books make a good subject in a still life. They're excellent for practicing these perspective problems. So in that, some people aren't so keen on them, but they're also, these older books, like old-fashioned books, they communicate a sort of age to them, which I like in a still life. There we go, just that's a little bit of reflected light bouncing up into that plane there. That's the cast shadow, so restating that. That also makes the reflected light look a little bit more brighter in comparison. And there again, just bringing the light up, sort of dragging the paint just to give the feeling of light bouncing around the composition a bit more. Going a bit darker in that corner, just so that edge reads a bit more against the red book. There's usually a lot of squinting going on at this stage, again trying to take in the general feel of the composition. And this is the bit where I decided to change that colour again. I think that blue was a bit too much. So just knock that back. A bit of red there. Again, that's a bit of creative license, but again, just sticking within that warm colour palette. And a bit darker there. Suggestion of the pages, so these are the little accents, restating that line. So these are the more subtle adjustments that I might not have done if I was doing the live stream. And again, you always, I mean, it's nice to work quickly, but you should always be asking yourself, you know, what could I do to make the painting better? How could I improve it? It's very easy, especially when you're working in a more impressionist way, is just to sort of say, well, that's good enough, that will do. And but I think you should always be checking, you know, is there more you can do? How could you improve it from where it is now? And certainly that, you know, even when it was finished. So that I've made that more mustard colour, and I think that adds to a more harmonious feel. But as you can see, there's a little bit of a bluer grey on the right hand side of the composition, which just balances out maybe all those warms. A few little highlights there just on the lip of the book. Just a little bit of reflection coming down there. Again, that helps to create and there I've done a little bit of a zig. This is trying to create just a sort of almost like a vertical axis here. And just a few little tweaks. So I was pleased with this little painting. I say I'll upload it, and it will be available on my website edcooper.art, where you can also see other examples of my work, including my landscape painting and some of my life drawing. So I normally would be running a life drawing class on a Monday evenings in Ipswich, but that's all been cancelled, as of all my other classes. So I've been very fortunate. I've managed to sort of keep my teaching going by offering these online classes, so that's been good. But I miss seeing all my students, and I miss just my normal day-to-day routine. There we go. So again, just asking myself, what does the painting need? How can I improve it? Every time I go up to my studio at the moment, I think to myself, you know, I should be up there. It's on a farm, so there aren't really any people around. But again, when you listen to the news, you think, oh, maybe I shouldn't take the risk. But as I say, I don't really come across anyone there, and I've got all the, you know, I've got this great light box which allows me to set up these still life. So. And here we go, just tidying up that little bit at the top. So I think we must be coming towards the end now. So yeah, I think at this stage I was happy. I think I felt I'd got it blocked in. What do you think of the perspective? I don't think I did too bad a job of it. As I say, oh, there we are, a little signature. So I usually sign either with my initials, or in this case I actually use my full name. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. So if you liked it, please you can help me out by liking down below and subscribing. So I'll be here same time next week for another demonstration painting. This one's now been uploaded to my website, so here is the final image. So there you go. So I was really pleased with how this turned out, and I think hopefully it illustrated the importance of good perspective. Anyway, thanks for watching, and see you soon.